Early in 1977, the main ZANLA staging base at Chioco in Chait province was being monitored, and following on information gleaned from captured cadres and photographs from a high-flying Canberra, it became clear that numbers in the camp were swelling. The facility was an abandoned Portuguese-built garrison, consisting of a barracks complex with electricity and running water that housed up to 100 trained, well-equipped guerrillas. Defenses had been carefully thought out and consisted of strategically placed bunkers, revetments, and trenches. Aerial photographs and radio intercepts suggested a sophisticated communications facility. Frelimo troops constantly moved in and out of the camp, but they were also reported to be based in the nearby town and equipped with heavy weaponry. Orders were to try and avoid inflicting unnecessary casualties on them, but if they were ensconced, the SAS would do what it had to do. Graham Wilson was told to plan the operation to attack Chioco without air support, remembers Robinson. This was a political decision because the men in the ministries did not want Rhodesian fingerprints on the attack. All a bit bloody stupid because who else was responsible after all? But those were our instructions. With Andy Chait back from his officer's course, along with Ian Bowen and Nick Breitenbach, they would be the senior NCOs in support of Commander Graham Wilson. The normally taciturn Chait was in fine spirit and more forthcoming than usual. He had stopped drinking following a fistfight that saw him virtually destroy a nightclub, and had made a decision to quiet down. He was dating a Salisbury bank employee, Carol Doty. Chait was also happy to be back in the fighting fold after a voluntary absence triggered by the enforced inactivity of the Vorster-orchestrated Detente debacle. On more than one occasion he had located the enemy and been denied permission to engage due to political considerations. Frustrated and angry, he had handed in his weapon and left the army. I was with him on a hunter-killer mission in Mozambique, remembers Daryl Watt, and we found a large group of the enemy on the move into Rhodesia. We quickly got tactical and watched them moving towards us. I fired up the radio and requested permission to hit them, but it was refused. It was soul-destroying. We had to sit there and watch them walk past on their way to Rhodesia. It was too much for Andy. He said to hell with this and left the army in disgust. Went to Johannesburg and started a private security firm. But I think he missed the squadron pretty badly and he came back. There were 24 of us under command of Graham Wilson, with Andy Chait second in command, remembers Franz Botha. 4 would constitute the mortar section, 4, including me, would make up the stop group, and 16 would form the assault group. We took as many mortar bombs, claymore mines, white phosphorus, HE grenades, and ammunition as we could carry. We knew there were quite a lot of gooks there, so we were expecting a big punch-up. Close to the target on the approach, we left the mortar team. They were to open up once the attack commenced. As with Nick Breitenbach and Jake Harper-Ronald, we traveled by road to the Marymount Mission airstrip. From there we went in by chopper just before first light. We flew low to avoid detection. Soon the pilots started pointing vigorously below, indicating they were descending, and they banked sharply. The ground rose fast to meet them, but, unable to find suitable landing spots, the helicopters hovered near the Roya River. The men grabbed their packs and leapt into the unknown, heaving their loads with them. Hitting the ground running, soldiers sprinted into positions of all-around defense, searching outwards for hostile intent. All senses primed for danger, they barely registered the noise of the rotors and turbines fading away. But very soon it was perfectly quiet, and once again they were very alone against the odds. In the distance they saw the choppers racing low over the trees for home. Some wondered if they would live to see those flying machines again. Lying low in thick cover, all turned their ears to the silence of the wild and listened for any untoward sounds, then rested until nightfall, which seemed to come too fast. No sooner had they closed their eyes than the peripatetic Chait was onto them, whispering quietly in each soldier's ear that it was time to hitch up their cargo and prepare for the long march east, which would take them closer to the people they would kill. That afternoon, Wilson summoned Breitenbach, Bowen, and Chait for a final briefing before hitching up again and heading for target. As darkness approached, stick commanders checked equipment for the last time, making sure their men had what each was required to carry, and there would be no squeaks or rattles. Each man jumped and shook to ensure that his load was all secure and muzzled for noise. Then they began the approach towards the lights, where the enemy seemed oblivious to the danger that lurked in the dark. Just before midnight, the raiders came to a halt. The sound of music had broken the silence, and it was clear they were closing in on an unsuspecting enemy. Their spirits lifted when they heard happy voices singing in unison, and it occurred to them that they were gate-crashing a party. Sneaking closer until the lines of the buildings became clearer, Wilson halted the assault group. while he led his mortar team, under command of Sergeant Nick Joost, to the position from which they would lay down support fire after the attack was joined. The troopers were relieved to be dumping their quota of bombs. The mules could only hope their comrades would dispatch them with lethal effect. Wilson then went in for a closer reconnaissance and on his return issued final instructions. Breitenbach with 8 claymores would cover the northern sector, while he and Bowen would position the rest up against the iron barrack walls. H-hour, when the assault would be launched, was 5:30 a.m. The assault teams would then advance and kill everything that moved. From their position, blocking the expected line of flight, Breitenbach and his machine gunners would cut down those who tried to escape. While the revelry seemed to have died down, voices continued to break the silence. One of Chait's men coughed quietly, but not quietly enough. He was immediately ordered out the assault group and replaced with one of the men from the mortar team. Silence was vital, and the sergeant was in no mood to take chances. The remaining 3 sections slithered up to the perimeter fence. I remember following Nick, remembers Botha, and noticing he was headed straight through the middle of the camp. I thought, man, this guy's got serious balls. But Nick was night blind and had not seen the buildings. When I pointed them out, he immediately went into the leopard crawl positions. Our job was to get claymore mines in place, which we would detonate when the tears tried to run through our position. We crept under a fence and got close to a bunker. Chait wished his comrades good luck and edged himself slowly forward to a vantage point to wait and watch. The garrison went quiet and movement ceased. An occasional chirp from a cricket was all that broke a silence, pregnant with tension and excitement. Chait, calm as ever, lay quietly, watching, waiting, and ready. Fingers curled comfortably around triggers as a light breeze whispered through the grass. The sergeant liked what he saw. The killing ground was set perfectly. All he needed now was the signal to open fire. Wilson and Bowen took their men under the fence and crawled towards the barrack blocks. Quietly they slunk into the shadows against the walls and planted their mines. Just as Bowen finished laying his last, a light flickered above his head, startling him. A face with a cigarette between the lips stared outwards from a window, directly above Bowen's position. The SAS man looked up and held his breath. Suddenly, the door closest to Bowen opened, and a scantily clad individual came outside to relieve himself. Bowen froze while urine splashed in his face, and the pungent aroma flooded his nasal passages. He held his breath, terrified he would sneeze. The flow seemed to have no end. Finally, the individual shook himself dry, spat loudly, took another draw on his cigarette, and shuffled back inside. My job was the claymores, but after setting them up close to the barracks room, I heard the guards snoring nearby and decided to get grenades ready. I felt so bloody exposed, remembers Franz Botha. I knew that if I was spotted, I would die. My heart was making so much noise I thought they would hear me. I could throw the grenades, but that would not save me. By the time they detonated, I'd be fucked. My hands were wet with sweat, and I think that 15-minute wait was easily the longest of my life. It just wouldn't end. At the stroke of the hour on 24 March 1977, Breitenbach let rip his claymores and Botha hurled his grenades, right on target. Wilson and Bowen waited a second to let the slumbering ZANLA men exit their beds and come to their feet. Standing up, they would present a far more prominent target. Then, with deliberate precision, they detonated their mines, sending up a lethal shower of shrapnel that tore into the bodies of the slumbering terrorists. With the sound of the explosions ringing in their ears, the assault teams immediately went into the mix. RPDs and AKs roared and stunned defenders crumpled in the face of a fiercely accurate wall of fire. The attackers wielding the weapons were some of the quickest guns in the South, and on turf they felt comfortable with. They moved fast on their feet, their reactions were rapid, their aim deadly, and they needed no commands, as natural aggression blended with fine training to produce every opponent's worst nightmare. Many of the enemy had received advanced training in the military academies of China, but nothing learnt there had prepared them for the fury they faced as red and green tracer lit up the dawn. For the guerrillas, it was a pyrotechnic pantomime that was all about the quick and the dead, and they were fast, but not fast enough. Nothing was heard above the thunder of the guns as merciless volleys of fire ripped bodies to pieces. Chait, at his ruthless best, destroyed what he could, then moved rapidly to a flanking position to cut off a potential line of flight, and the plight of the enemy worsened as the circle of fire tightened. Buildings attracted Bowen's attention. Shouldering an RPG-7, he blew holes in them, through which the gunners ran, pouring fire inwards, under beds, into cupboards, and into the ceilings. Anyone who tried to hide was soon dead. One man came to the end of his days ignominiously, while seated on a toilet, while another took bullets up his buttocks before dying hanging out a window. Shock turned into mayhem. The unrelenting ferocity of the attack sent the enemy running blindly, in total panic and abandoning all hope. Finding only one way to escape, the terrorists bolted in the direction where Breitenbach, Botha, and men lay in wait with RPDs blazing. The scene filled with undressed flying objects as the frantic ZANLA men, realizing their mistake too late, tried to go aerial over the Rhodesian gunners and high-jump the bullets that tore into them. Most failed and died in their underpants. One was hit in midair and landed heavily atop the trooper who had shot him. Some resistance came from a sentry box on the outskirts of the camp, but this defense was soon neutralized. The weight of fire had a devastating impact upon the occupants, and they broke down their own guardhouse in their haste to leave. There was a moment of mirth when they witnessed one of the guards, complete with his sentry post still wrapped around him, running away with all possible haste and purpose. With buildings demolished and visible opposition accounted for, the assault troops started clearing the bunkers and trenches with grenades and bunker bombs, while Breitenbach and his men continued to mow down the strays that were driven towards them. Soon the stop group was a small island of life surrounded by a mountain of dead flesh. With the garrison attack successfully executed, Chait went hunting for more and took his men across a gully on the outskirts of the base. A lone terrorist fired on them, but the Quicksilver sergeant cut him down, and then wheeled his section to the left and towards an open cultivated field that they raked with fire. Exercising caution, they moved forward and drew more fire. Ahead of them was a trench containing terrorists who forced them to the ground, but only for as long as it took for a trooper to storm the position and throw a white phosphorus grenade. The smoke veiled the Rhodesian troops from view, while the blast had an immediate and painful effect as the phosphorus burned through the skins and into the flesh of the enemy, sending running figures into the open, where they were quickly shot. Chait took his men back on the offensive before being ordered to a halt to await the rest of the assault team. No sooner had they stopped the advance than they came under fire again from a machine gunner near an anthill. Out of grenades, Chait called for one from another soldier. With an M62 in hand, he was about to charge the lone rifleman when a burst of fire kicked up dirt all around him. The shooter had him in his sights. There was a loud slap, denims ripped and dust flew off Chait's trousers as the bullet struck. He spun around, then went down, tumbling 2 meters into the trench. Blood poured from his thigh and he grabbed his leg to staunch the flow. A tourniquet was quickly applied and the stricken sergeant was carried to a bed where an intravenous drip was inserted, but his eyes rolled back in his head and his pallor was ashen. At the same time, heavy weapons, B-10 recoilless rocket launchers, and 82mm mortars opened up from the town where Filimo was based, and men steadied for a counterattack while Chait was carried to the firm base where the mortars were. Relief was obvious when a pair of hunters appeared overhead to deal with trouble. With Flight Lieutenant Danny Savaboda at the controls of the Alouette, the wounded soldier was laid gently on the floor and they were soon airborne and heading for Matoko, where medical staff waited. But they would not be needed, as the helicopter climbed to fly the Mavarodhanha Mountains, beyond which lay his adopted country. Andy Chait took his last breath, and the SAS lost one of its best and bravest. Deeply saddened, Wilson disembarked at Matoko and took himself to where he could be alone with his thoughts. Neil Story, a young RLI subaltern, unknowingly walked into the tin shack. I did not know Captain Wilson then. I knew who he was, and I'd heard a great deal about him, but had never met him, so it was something of a shock when I saw him sitting on a bench, covered in blood with his head in his hands. I wanted to help, but I knew there was nothing I could do other than leave him alone, so I walked away. Only afterwards did I discover it was Andy Chait's blood that I saw. I'll never forget that dreadful sight. The next morning, Carol Doty went to work as usual at the bank in Masasa. As she was cashing up that afternoon, she saw a military vehicle draw up outside and recognized her mother inside. Her mind raced as she grappled to find a satisfactory explanation. Struggling to convince herself that her fears might be unfounded, her mother's face made it plain something terrible had happened. Even before she heard the news, Carol knew that Andy would not be coming back. Her mother took her in her arms while a soldier waited to take them home. In my opinion, Andy Chait was one of the best NCOs the Rhodesian SAS produced, says Brian Robinson. He was an outstanding professional, recalls Darrell Watt. As an operator, he taught the young soldiers his shooting philosophy. One shot, one gook. I didn't know Sergeant Andy Chait. I knew Andre Chait, who was my half-brother, same mom, different dad, remembers Marlene Chait. Although we had different fathers, Andre and I were close from as far back as I can remember. He was really the father figure in my life. There was an 11-year age gap between him and myself. His death devastated me, coming only 7 years after our mother, Anne, committed suicide. I had just turned 17. I remember that the evening of Andy's death, I had a vivid dream that he was caught up in a heavy gunfire, with explosions everywhere. That concludes a short segment of We Dared to Win, detailing the attack on Chioco, which was Andy Chait's final operation. I hope you have enjoyed this narration, and if this is well received, I'll certainly produce more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.